All right, welcome to the MCOE Best Practices Spotlight, the podcast that brings you valuable insights, innovative ideas, and exceptional strategies from the world of marketing and agency growth. I'm your host, Lane Houk, and I'm excited to have you join us for another exciting episode. In today's episode, we are honored to welcome a distinguished guest, Doug Campbell, the co-founder of Snowbank Capital. With a rich background in corporate media and marketing, Doug has held key leadership positions, including the former VP of Revenue for Vendasta and Chief Revenue Officer for Golden West Broadcasting. As a seasoned veteran in the industry, Doug is an expert at optimizing company revenues and maximizing business opportunities through strategic analysis. With his impressive track record, he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the Marketing Center of Excellence community. Together, we're going to explore Doug's insights into marketing best practices, learn about the latest trends and innovations that are shaping the industry, and really uncover some secrets to driving performance and scaling your agency in an ever-changing digital landscape. So sit back, relax, and join us as we dive into this exciting episode of the MCOE Best Practices Spotlight featuring Doug Campbell of Snowbank Capital. Welcome, Doug.
Hey, thanks for having me, Lane.
Yeah, awesome to have you. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. I know you're going to really unveil some amazing insights to our community today. Why don't you, before we dive into some of the real nuts and bolts here, why don't you give us a background about who is Doug Campbell? Where have you been? I know our audience probably would love to understand who you are and get some background information on you.
Yeah, absolutely. The baseball card. Back to the baseball card. For me, my journey into agencies, digital marketing started about 20 plus years ago, where I was in sports marketing and decided to venture off on my own with a partner and start a digital directory business in Alberta, Canada. Beyond that, throughout my history, I've been the VP of Revenue at Vendasta, where we helped thousands of agencies scale. And where we met, yeah, absolutely. And then more recently, I was Chief Revenue Officer of one of Canada's largest independent media companies, and where we were able to scale their digital operations, their digital arm of their business quite quickly from startup to an integral part of their business through COVID and beyond. And then, of course, that led to today where we're in a business where we're looking to acquire B2B service businesses, such as like agencies, more specifically agencies, and through our business called Snowbank Capital.
So that's really why I thought this would be an interesting episode to interview you, Doug, is with Snowbank Capital, you're looking at acquisitions of agencies. Why don't you quick give us what's the fingerprint or the ideal type of agency that you look to acquire, and then we'll kind of back into some of the greater details there.
Yeah, no, for sure. For us, it's pretty simple. For us to take a look at something is usually it's greater than about 2 million in EBITDA. It has to have at least hundreds, if not thousands, of SMEs within the agency, so they serve a greater base of customers. It's not just ones or twos. So they've shown that they've been able to do that at some level of scale. We also call it no legacy issues, which means that it was incorporated past 2000, which means that this is not an aging media company of some sort. So it eliminates some of the smaller media companies from our purview. And of course, beyond that is they've got a talented roster of folks that have grown with that business as well too. So they don't have employee churn past a certain metric as well. There's also a key factor in churn as well too. It's one thing to be able to acquire. It's another thing to be able to retain. So we did certainly factor in a certain level of churn before we start to explore too deeply on an agency.
For sure. What was the minimum revenue that you kind of look for in an agency?
So it's 2 million in EBITDA. So revenue can vary because sometimes that could be 6 million, sometimes that could be 8 million to achieve that. But 2 million in EBITDA in the trailing 12 months is typical for us. So
break that down. What is EBITDA?
So earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization.
Okay.
And depreciation. Sorry.
So for the lay people out there, or for the agency owners out there who may not understand how that actually applies in a business, how does that earnings before interest, taxes, and deductions? What does that look like?
So essentially, it's your net income before you take out any taxes, any depreciation, before you do any amortizations to your books. So it's the basis in which a lot of the world will calculate the value of the business. So beyond net income, EBITDA is normally the gold standard of what your valuation can be and what you truly earned. So that's.
So for a marketing agency or an advertising agency, a lot of them have gross revenues that are very high because maybe they're taking an ad spend that's then going right back out. How does that work into the life of an agency? Is they're looking at their revenues? How do you evaluate that in the overall look of an agency?
So sorry, can you say that again, just based on their advertising spend?
Yeah, so when they're looking at their gross revenues, but you're looking at EBITDA as the really benchmark for what they're really earning.
Yeah.
What are some things that are coming off of those gross revenues that are more maybe fluff in the marketing agency world that aren't really going to drip down to the EBITDA line item?
Everything will flow down to that line, but there's some things that I think you're cognizant of. There's ad backs. Ad backs would be like a founder or an owner's salary, or your earnings that you're taking out of that business usually will come back down into the EBITDA calculations. If you're showing, let's say for round numbers, if you're showing $1 million and you take 500K and earnings, your EBITDA would probably be about 1.5 minus a standard value. So if you're looking at a CEO position in an agency of XYZ size, the typical earnings would maybe be 150, 200,000 that you would put back. And so the net would be another 300K in EBITDA, which is good because you want to add as much as you can to that number because that's the number that gets multiplied in the valuation. So there's add backs and deductions that come back out of that. Some of the deductions that come back out that we've seen is that there's where you perhaps aren't paying market to staff, the staff versus employed staff. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just that if you're looking at it as a business that you're taking over, if the staff may or may not stay, or if they're not necessarily permanent or not being paid market rates, you have to factor some of that in because that's what will happen in a transition is that you probably want to pay them market rates and make sure that those folks are firmed up. There's really, as we've explored and we go through deal flow, there was really like 5 themes that we found. There was a lot of businesses that we liked and a lot that fit a very generic scope of hypothesis. But there's 5 different things that we found in specific that were detrimental or were things that the agency just needed to fix. If they just fixed those things, it would make the valuation way higher and it would make it more attractive to a buyer like us. And explain afterwards too, there's probably 2 different types of buyers that may come through. There's folks like us that are looking to come in and take over the business, being a holistic transaction of some sort. There's partnerships, and then there's also M&A where you're just putting 2 companies together. But the 5 things that we ran into was customer concentration issues. So we saw that a lot. So if you have a customer that forms 30 to 40% of your revenue, that's a great thing from a bottom line perspective, and it looks really good for us.
It's risky.
It's risky because that customer goes away. That's 40% of the purchase price that we're paying essentially. So customer concentration issues. And number 2 was churn. Is that if churn was too high, it's too risky. So it becomes a calculation or a formula in which we can see how quickly the revenue could flow out of the organization. You can cover that with a lot of acquisition sometimes, but at the end of the day, churn isn't equal. It's a detriment, but it's also an opportunity as well. So for that agency to be able to fix some of those things that are helping to create the environment in which that customer is leaving or not staying for a typical LTV. 3 was succession plans. So the owner not planning to be out of the business, where there's a person that is entirely detrimental that's built around them. In the early days, every agency I think is probably that way. Is right. That there was one founder, one person, that fearless captain that led everybody to the promised land. But at a certain point, there just needs to be those strong SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and the ability for the owner to not be present in the business and it still operate at scale, which will, again, higher valuation because then you can sell it to somebody like me and we can continue the business with little risk. When you leave and you're that critical person, when you leave, that's a big risk for us to take because you're the heartbeat of the organization.
Yep.
Not having proper financials. So I can't express this one enough. This is that take that time, invest in it, hire somebody if you need to. Having a proper data room, it goes a long way.
What? Say that again.
Data room.
So what do you mean by that, a proper data room?
So data room would be where you would have all your financials a lot of the information on the business, anything from income statements, balance sheets, to employee compensation structures or lists. There's a lengthier list of items that go in there. So when a company like mine is looking at it, we would go through there and we'd be able to get as much information as possible to try and make the decision without talking to you, is that we can see it all from a numbers perspective. But the basics of a data room would just be your income statements and balance sheets.
And so that could be as simple as having it in a Google Drive folder with just those statements in a place that's accessible for an investor.
Yeah, exactly. As much as the investor would want to know. So it explains your business. Some of the really good data rooms have FAQs. Is it because when they interview with multiple folks like us, they tend to get smart and say, hey, yeah, we know you're going to ask these questions. So we're just going to put FAQs in here to answer some of them. They've seen a blip in our revenue, and here, this is what it was. So that we're able to get through it a bit more quickly and have less phone calls back and forth to try and understand.
For sure. Now, I know you and I were talking offline about the potential acquisition you guys were just going through, and this was one of the sore spots with the acquisition, give or take. Is that accurate?
Yeah. For folks that haven't been through it before, what tends to happen from a process standpoint is that there's the initial view, is that we tend to have a discussion, we look at some numbers, and if there's enough interest there, you get quickly to what is called a letter of intent. The letter of intent basically says, here's what we think we're going to buy your business for. Here's what we're committing to based on things checking out, like financials, like XYZ. You can put a bunch of clauses that are in there just as you want to investigate as you go through, but you're essentially agreeing to a price. You're agreeing that, hey, we'll meet your price based on these things checking out. And then you get into a process called due diligence. And that's where, as you had said before, we ran into a little bit of problem as we went through one of our potential acquisitions in due diligence. Within that, when you do that, typically you'll hire third-party company. We will hire a third-party company to come through as an independent and take a look at financials, make sure that they match with GAAP principles, general accounting practices, and to ensure that banking information is all straight, and all the little small things that happen with an acquisition. As you alluded to, within that process, if financials don't match up, it becomes a very big red flag. That's why I state that making sure that you have your solid financials, you're amortizing things correctly, and just if you don't have that, I always say I'm not an accountant by trade. I tend to hire out those services.
I was just going to get to that. I would say the vast majority of all business owners, but especially in our audience, the agency owners, the vast majority of them are not accountants or financial wizards by any stretch. That's my worst area. That's why I love interviewing experts like you, because this area of finances is probably my weakest spot as a business owner. I didn't go to school. I didn't have a financing degree. And it's a little bit intimidating. Like, honestly, all the numbers and taxes and start throwing out terms. And so I was just going to get to that. For those people who are like, man, I'd love to sell my company either today, or I'd love to work towards that in 2 or 5 years. But this whole area of like EBITDA and amortization and taxes and accounting, I don't even like it. What do I do? What would you recommend? It's just as simple as finding a local accountant. I know now that's where I'm getting into you. What have you experienced? Because there's a lot of accountants out there who wouldn't know. Really, they're more like bookkeepers. They'll do the basic work, but they're not going to give you strategy, and they're not going to help you really structure a company and the financials for a potential acquisition or sale.
Yeah, no, it's as simple as having that trusted partner. There's some that are better for sale. So as you're planning for sale, there's a few companies that we've ran into that do a really good job in terms of how they help you present your company. And those would be more brokerages, but the brokerages will help you with that as well too. But a great accountant goes a long way. That is really good in your state, but also probably somebody that has operations in multiple states is probably a healthier transaction, because they've seen a lot of businesses like yours. There's a few that you can look at that are industry specific, like within the agency group. There's a brokerage called Barney, which is
We Are Barney.
Yeah.
How do you spell Barney?
Barney.
Okay.
It has also been one that we've ran into a lot of their listings, and they understand the agency industry. They understand how to present it, which again saves a lot of time for folks like us, so that we're We're not having to sort through it. But yeah, that's what I would suggest. Again, having a proper set of financials and just taking that time or investing into that will pay big dividends, and it'll save your time as well too. So it just saves a lot of pain and suffering as you're looking to potentially sell.
And then I stopped you at number 4, but you had 5 issues or 5 things that you caught your eye as you're going through this process.
Lane, you're so good. You're leading into my next point. There's brokerages. Like, so when you are listing privately is great. And if you can, sometimes the best deals will come through friends of friends that know you quite well, and you don't even have to go to market. Otherwise, you will have to go to market in some which way, shape, or form. And so typically that'll be through a brokerage of some sort. And again, picking somebody that understands agencies, somebody that understands your business, and somebody who's not going to give you false expectations of what your business is valued at. So we see this a lot, is that a brokerage has promised that you're going to get a certain amount of multiple, that your business is worth probably more than it is because they got the listing from you, and they're now wrapping it.
People are saying the house is worth a lot more than what it's really worth just to get the list.
Yeah. So we see that a bit as well. Just be cognizant of it. When you're looking at multiples within the business, ask them about what their rubric is, how they look at that, what they've seen in comparables. It's not unlike real estate. Show me some of the comparables from the ones you've sold recently. Show me something else so that you have some sort of basis of what you're looking at, so that you don't get too excited when somebody says, hey, your business is worth $15 million when it's actually worth, 3. And it's a far cry. Wrap your head around after the fact that maybe you might be going through the process for nothing if that's not acceptable for you as an exit.
At a high level, are you able to give our audience a little insight into how the multiple is typically calculated?
Yeah, it's simple in some aspects, but there are complications depending on how fast you're growing and the amount of EBITDA. And so the general rule of thumb is that if it's a good, solid performing agency, is that getting anywhere from a 3 to 4x multiple is something
Of EBITDA.
If EBITDA multiple you could probably consider. There's different ways to look at it. Some brokerages and some folks look at it as a revenue multiple, which is just it's a lesser multiple on revenue typically. The amount of EBITDA that you have. So as soon as you start hitting 5-6 million, the multiple does tend to go up. The pace of your growth, if you're growing by 50% to 100% per year or something crazy like that, can justify a higher multiple as well too. But always build it off of your trailing 12 months. So that's typically where folks like us will be looking. We actually look at probably about 2 years of that. So we'll look at your past 24 months to see the pattern. And so you're usually building off of that number times your multiple. So if you're growing really quick, your multiple will get higher, but your EBITDA is going to be the same. You can't base it on, it's hard to base it on future years of, hey, we expect to make this in 2024. It's like, well, it's just not a reality yet. Sure. But again, pace will dictate the multiples change.
And of course, if you've got that trailing 24 months of good growth and you're on pace again, that's going to make you more confident as an investor that pace will continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's about being able to repeat that over and over again. Then you've got a system.
So you guys, let's just say hypothetically, Snowbank Capital acquires an agency. Beyond the sale and the revenue or money that's made off of the sale for the agency owner or owners, what does Snowbank do? Okay, you've acquired XYZ agency. Now what?
Yeah, no, great question, because there's a few different types of buyers. We in specific are more interested in stable growth. And so for us, it's important that the core of the business is going to continue. If the founder is going to stay in or look at that being their exit point, then for us, it's really important for us to have that stability and that we're buying a business that we knew was going to still continue to have that growth and isn't going to fall apart the next day as soon as the owner leaves. For us, it's about scaling it. So it's from my background and my partner's background, we've been able to scale agencies previously. So it'd be about finding those operational efficiencies where we can scale and can empower the teams that already exist today to be able to do so.
Awesome. I know that was right in line with your issue number 3 of succession planning, or if there's a deficiency there. Yeah. When you acquire an agency, how are you helping that achieve that growth and the operational efficiencies? Like, are you personally getting involved? Do you have a team of people that come in, and like, how does that process work or look like for maybe 3, 6, 12 months?
Yeah, good question. So for us, it's important. Again, with our background, we're probably quite active for 6 to 12 months, if not more. And that's just quite simply because that's what we do. It's also cultural too. It's we don't want to be the person behind the curtain that nobody ever meets. It's important to ingrain ourselves in the company's existing culture and start to point to where we're going. So that's important to us. But of course, we also hire really talented people that are going to help steer that ship, or they might already be on the ship per se, that we just empower to get us to the next point. But it's about looking at each one's different deficiencies. If it's a business that has a little bit of a churn problem, there's a customer success motion that probably needs to be implemented. If it's an acquisition problem, it could be your inbound lead engine, your outbound motion. And so those types of things is that we just hone in on those. But generally, the business is solid. So it's gotten to a certain point. If it's gotten to 2 million EBITDA, they've done a really good job with it. And it's just a few small but impactful tweaks over time that we think has massive growth effects as you compound it.
Sure. And I think the message there for our audience listening to this is you don't have to have the perfect agency to sell it. There's never going to be a perfect agency where every single point you're just going to be like firing on all cylinders. There's always going to be places to improve. There's always going to be some gaps or some efficiencies or deficiencies that could turn into better efficiencies. And going back through, I just want to repeat what Doug said here because I think it bears repeating. The 5 points or places that they look when they're acquiring an agency. Number one, they're looking for customer concentration issues. So do you have a good base of customers, or are you really heavy with a few that are accounting for the majority of your revenue? They're investors who are looking to acquire an agency are looking for a good base of customers and not being too much revenue or too much percentage of your revenue all in one basket, so to speak. Building a good base of customers. Doug, anything you want to add on that point on customer concentration?
No, you'll see that in early businesses, but is it customer concentration? I wouldn't get too worried if you're under 2 million, because that sometimes that happens, of course.
Yeah.
But as you scale out, it probably flattens a little bit. So if we see it when it's past that, it's generally a little bit problematic, or just it makes the valuation a little bit less for a buyer like us.
So let me back into this a little bit for all of you listening, because as an agency owner, the easiest way to get into a customer concentration issue is to offer everyone a custom program. Okay. If you have a specific set of programs, let's say 2 or 3 programs or products that you are offering to your audience, and these are their options. If they want to get onto your bus, if they want to get into your agency and engage your agency to help them, then these are going to be their programs, right? If you're offering custom program A and custom program B and custom program C, and that's your kind of standard operating procedure with every single new prospect, that's where you can potentially get into customer concentration issues, because you really don't have a specific set of programs. If you have 2 programs and everyone's got to jump into one of those 2 programs, you're just going to keep adding customers into one of those 2 programs. You're not going to have these variances in your revenue based on a per customer basis. So that would be my recommendation. I know it's what Josh Nelson recommends in the 7-figure agency as well, is to have a couple of programs and then go to market with those programs and stick with it, because custom anything is really hard to scale. Doug, number 2, you said churn retention issues. So you're really looking at the churn, the retention, or are they really good at retaining their customers? What are some specific, besides just the raw number of the churn ratio or the percentage there, what are some specific things you look at in that area?
Yeah, no, it's really, does the customer leave? What was the percentage of the actual churn? So churning rate out. The other piece of it would be, there's also a metric where you have customers that stay, that expand. So like having the net retention number is really important, which is the combination of the two. So that's churn plus the ones that stayed and how much they grew. That's an important number for us as well, just to understand it. So if it gets too high, it's just that you have months left in your business potentially. Like if things were to stop, then there's really 4 to 5 months of runway or less potentially as you get higher and higher in those numbers. And there's just an issue. There's an issue either probably at the beginning of the process when you're selling something. Sometimes it can be on reporting performance, but more often we find it's probably more so at the beginning. So it's probably a sales issue.
If I can dive into that insight you have there real quick. So what you say you typically see is when there are agencies who have a higher churn rate, it's typically the problem can be identified in that maybe the first 60 to 90 days. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah,
Onboarding
exactly.
that client.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. As they onboard the customer, and in those first, as we all know, hey, the first 60 to 90 days is critical. So
Really
if you
important.
don't prove value, then it's going to be tough to do later on. It's important to hit the customer delight in those first few months, and that's hitting the goals and being able to show the ROI of why they're with you and not the next person.
And so what Doug just said is being able to show them why they're getting the ROI, or just showing them why you're doing a good job for them and why they should keep paying you. Really, ultimately, that's the unspoken conversation that's going on as you're servicing a new client, as you're providing the new services that they've hired you for, is here's what we're doing, and here's why you should keep paying us to do this month over month. And that ultimately comes down to communication, right? So if you're not communicating heavily with the client in the first 30, 60, 90 days, you're going to expose yourself to a higher risk of churn. We found that in our own white label agency. I found after last year, getting enough feedback that on our first 30 days, we weren't communicating enough with our agencies on the new campaign. It wasn't necessarily leading to churn, but I definitely saw enough feedback where I'm like, this has got to be fixed. We've got to increase our level of communication, especially in the first 30 days. And so we just took steps to just put extra communications in that customer journey to alleviate that odd feeling that people get when they feel like, hey, what's going on? What are we doing lately? And that's the biggest question that every customer is going to have is, what are you doing for me lately? So if you're doing a great job in those first 30, 60, 90 days, then the next thing is, are you getting results and are you still communicating? The other thing I see agencies doing is that they do a great job in communicating those first 30 and 60 days, but then they put this into maintenance mode and the communication drops off. And then you get yourself into a potential churn issue in those 6 to 12 months. You're nodding your head.
There's a huge correlation statistically to your point, to doing a really good job in that first 60 to 90 days and upsell metrics as well. So being able, the customer will double down with you, is that they probably have a second problem that they need to solve. And the more you talk to them and the more that you've shown that you're a good partner, they'll trust you with some more of those problems as well.
Yeah, that's really good. Awesome. Succession planning and the owner being able to just leave and check out, that really gets into systems, right? Like the owner building systems and making sure that they're not the bottleneck in any one component of their overall business. Where have you seen business owners really getting stuck, meaning they're not able to leave? There's been a deficiency in succession planning. What areas of the agency business do you typically see that?
Most owners are in the chief executive role, is that they just tend to hang on to too much for too long, is the bigger problem. And it's done out of love and growth for the business. Because again, it started with you probably at some point, and it started with you and a few others, and you become reliant on yourself. So it's just being able to pull yourself back from that, trust in others to be able to operate your business based on what you've come to know through your years of operation, and just being able to take that step back. It's a hard thing to do. We find that there still is a big gap in that succession planning, and being able to have that plan. It usually comes too late. Is it now you're trying to escape the business versus gradually handing that off over time to some of your trusted folks that you have within your business. I encourage business coaches can help with that. So we've seen that. I've used them. My partner uses them, or a mentor in the space will help you get out of your head to get in to have your head. Yeah, get your head on the business versus in the business, and to understand some of those things. Because sometimes you're just so busy, it's hard to do. Like it's hard to get out of the business and wrap your mind around how you might do that, how you might have that succession plan.
I totally agree. You definitely need a business coach, a mentor, someone who's going to hold you accountable, or just be honest with you, not out of criticalness, but just, hey, I want to help you. This is your goal. but these are some things that are not in place that you definitely need to shore up before we're ready to move to the next step. So make sure that if you're getting a business coach or a mentor, that you also that you give them permission. Let me say it this way. Give them permission to be brutally honest with you and to hold you accountable. It's just like hiring a weight training coach or a strength coach. If you don't give your coach permission to be honest with you, sometimes we all try to avoid conflict. Even the best intentioned coaches will still, none of us as humans like conflict. And if there's a perceived potential for conflict with being honest about something in your business, they might just overall avoid it. So I've always taken very direct steps with my coaches to say, hey, I want you to be honest with me. Would you be honest with me would you say it differently if I just gave you permission to be brutally honest with me? Do that with them, because that will come back in dividends for you.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, Doug, what besides the revenue mark, how can you, when you look at an agency, you're scanning the horizon for potential prospects as an investor, besides the pure revenue of 2 million, what are some things that you quick look for, or some things that you can spot quickly? If you look at an agency without having to dig into the financials or into their churn rate, are there some things that you just look at and you're like, that's a really good prospect for us, or that's definitely not a prospect for us, just based on some more superficial things that you can look at? And maybe the answer is no, I don't know. I'm just asking this.
No, because it's harder without the financial or without the data backing to it. Because I'll give you examples. Something can look really good on surface level and not have the underlying data to support that. And conversely, something can maybe not look that great, but underneath it's an engine that is firing on all cylinders. So that's been my experience with it, but there might be others that have a better eye that can say, nope, that's exactly it. But yeah, there's some that, as an example, perhaps as we've gone to their website, probably maybe isn't the best in the world. But as we look at their financials, their sales process is really good. And so again, it comes down to those things of the website's an easy fix. Sales process is a little bit more of a difficult one. So that's the example that I can give on it to give the comparison, because I just think it does come down to some of the numbers, and some are just more important than others, and they give you the opportunity to have that discussion too. So you get a real good feel when you're talking with an owner, founder, of how they operate their business by just having a discussion, just like we are here today.
So if an agency decides that they would like to start the process of being acquired, and they're not sure where they're at in that process, how do they start? What's a good place to start, and then start building from there?
Yeah, start with your financials. So make sure that you've had them double checked by an accountant that you trust, that make sure that they are exactly what they say they are. Start having conversations with other trusted peers or friends. You can phone brokerages to get an idea as well too. Again, just be careful. Again, a brokerage is looking for your business at the same time. Just make sure that you're asking for comparables. What have they sold recently, like yours, that smells a lot like your business, looks a lot like your business. And other than that, also calling somebody like us. I leave that offer open on the table as well too. A lot of times, what's happened is we've looked at some businesses that we haven't gotten to a point where we've got to a letter of intent. We've been very honest with our feedback to be able to say, hey, here's some things that if you fix these things, like, it becomes really compelling to us. Maybe in a year or two, you come back and send me a note, and we're happy to do that. And what's happened through those processes, while it hasn't worked out as a deal, we've gained some contacts and some new friends that hopefully we can help along the way.
Awesome. So a couple of things that I heard Doug say that I think are worth noting there. As in the business broker, if you're going to seek out a business broker, be careful. Don't just go and sign an agreement with the first broker that you talk to. Ask good critical thinking questions. Ask them about their experience in this space, success stories or case studies that they have, other businesses that they help get acquired that are like yours. But just be careful if you're going to use a business broker. Super appreciate the open invitation that you gave to our audience just to reach out if that's something that if they're in that range. Don't call Doug if you're brand new and you're $500,000 a year in revenue right now. If you're in that range that they're looking for, and you have an honest assessment, then appreciate that invitation that you gave for people to reach out and open a dialogue with Snowbank Capital for sure. And then again, I just heard Doug double down on the financials, right? So get your financials in order. If it's an accountant or a bookkeeper, if you don't have one, no one's getting acquired by using Quicken for their taxes every year and their financials in their agency. Doug, am I safe to say that? So if you're doing your own taxes right now and you're in Quicken or something like that, you need to level that up, right? So get an objective party who's an expert in financials and accounting and can help you just start to get your books and financials in order. If that's what you want to do, is prepare for and build for a potential exit and acquisition one day, whenever that might be. Doug, you've been super successful in multiple businesses now that you've been with, from your own business, then Vendasta, Golden West, now at Snowbank. What's one of your just secrets to success as a professional, I know you're an amazing husband and dad as well. You're just a great, successful human being. What did you learn growing up, or what is it that you took away that has helped you be successful in your professional career?
Good question, and I appreciate the compliments. We're gonna have to call every day. That makes me feel really good talking to you. But I think for me, it's never stop learning. So whether it's a book on a topic that I'm into, a podcast, in this day and age, I tend to listen to a bunch whenever I'm traveling. So I usually get through a good hour or two of good podcasts. And whether it's on a topic of private equity, or whether it's on a topic of agencies, or whether it's on a topic of AI or anything else that's coming down the pike, I really enjoy continuing to learn. And ultimately too, the other thing I've been talking to a few other founders about is make sure you're taking care of yourself too. So that's an important part of it. So make sure you've got not only learning time, but you've got time to take care of yourself. So whether that's working out or going for a walk or whatever you like doing, that kind of keeps your mental and physical both tied together. So it keeps both those things operating at a high pace.
So living up in the Great White North where you live, it's pretty cold up there, at least a good share of the year. What do you like to do for fun?
I got 3 kids in hockey, so we're at the hockey rink quite a bit. So that's
you and I share that.
Is like typical Canadian, right? That's
100%.
But
you've got some good hockey players there too.
Yeah.
So you're the ages of your 3?
We've got 4 kids, only 3 are in hockey. But yeah, we've got an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old.
Wow.
So we're busy whenever we're not doing things. So
busy and blessed and spending way too much time in hockey rinks.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Brother, I really appreciate your time spent with me and our audience. I really appreciate your insights. These are really good. Just even though I think some of these might be maybe obvious, once you hear it, you're like, yeah, I got to have my financials in place. But just giving us your take at it from your objective standpoint is really valuable. I know our audience will receive a ton of value from listening to this. So thank you again for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate you, and best of luck as I know you continue to grow Snowbank Capital.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Doug.